I will never forget that night. The jungle has a way of swallowing sound, leaving only the hum of insects and the distant cries of unseen animals. But that night, even the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Fog pressed itself against the tall glass windows of our mansion, the mist clinging to the wooden frames like pale fingers. Rain lashed against the roof, steady and merciless, rattling the gutters and seeping into the smell of damp wood that already haunted the house. Richard, my husband, lay in the grand four-poster bed in the master bedroom. He was a man of wealth, a man who had dragged me from my poverty into this suffocating jungle palace. Heavy velvet curtains hung above us, green and gold, moth-eaten at the edges. A Persian rug spread across the floorboards, its once bright patterns dulled by time. The bedside lamp cast a weak amber glow, trembling slightly whenever the wind howled. He had been coughing all evening. His illness was a cruel thing, a disease of the heart that demanded constant attention. "Never leave me alone, Elena," he always whispered. His voice was a ghost of what it once was, yet full of command. That night, his hand clutched mine with a grip too weak to cage me anymore. I watched his chest rise and fall, erratic, fragile. The veins in his neck strained with each breath. A bottle of medicine stood on the nightstand, the glass vial catching the dim light. One injection, that's all it would take to keep him breathing. I had done it so many times before. But this time, I did nothing. The storm raged outside, as though nature itself conspired to cover my silence. He reached for me once, his eyes wide with panic, and I simply pressed his hand back onto the sheets. I told myself it was mercy, that he had suffered long enough. But in truth, it was freedom I wanted. And I knew he was slipping. When his body stiffened, when his mouth opened in a final desperate gasp, when the rattle in his chest ended in stillness. I sat very still, staring at the shadow of the canopy above the bed. His hand grew cold in mine. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked steadily, each second a nail in his coffin. At last, Richard was gone. I did not cry. Instead, I stood, smoothed my nightdress, and walked to the writing desk in the corner of the room. Its polished oak surface reflected the flickering lamp. My fingers trembled as I lifted the receiver of the old rotary phone. The line crackled, the storm interfering with the connection, but I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang once. Twice. Then his voice. "Elena?" Daniel sounded groggy, but alive, full of warmth that Richard had never given me. "It's done," I whispered. My eyes darted back to the bed, to the lifeless shape beneath the sheets. "Come. Now." There was silence on the line, then a sharp inhale. "Elena, are you sure?" "Yes. Bring your things. We will not leave this place for 60 days. And when it is over, the fortune is ours." I heard him laugh softly, nervous but excited. 60 days in that jungle palace of yours? With you? I can endure anything." I wished I could believe him. When I hung up, I stood in the room for a long while, listening to the storm. The smell of rain pushed through the gaps in the window frame, mingling with the faint metallic odor of death. I moved to the dressing mirror, stared at my reflection. My black hair clung damp to my cheeks, my eyes wide with something between triumph and terror. Below me, the house groaned in the wind. The chandelier in the dining room swayed faintly, chains creaking. Somewhere in the basement, a pipe clanged. I pressed a hand to my chest, forcing myself to breathe steadily. I had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. Outside, headlights appeared faintly through the rain-streaked glass. Daniel's car crunched along the gravel drive, its beams slicing through the fog like pale swords. I smiled for the first time that night. Freedom had arrived. The old brass clock in the hallway had just struck 2 when Daniel arrived. I hurried down the wide staircase, my bare feet brushing against the threadbare runner carpet that had long ago lost its color. The air smelled of damp wood and dust, stirred by the draft that followed as I opened the heavy oak door. There he stood, dripping from the storm. His coat clung to his body, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. Behind him, the jungle was a wall of fog, trees bent in the rain, the gravel path shining like wet glass. "Elena," he breathed, his eyes searching mine. I threw myself against him, pressing my lips to his, tasting rain and mud. For a moment, the jungle, the storm, the corpse upstairs, none of it mattered. My body ached for warmth, for life, and Daniel's arms closed around me like chains of fire. We kissed in the doorway until the cold drove us inside. The mansion loomed above us in silence, watching, as if it too knew what we had done. The portraits of Richard's ancestors, men with hard eyes and grim mouths, hung in the corridor, staring down with disapproval. Their gilded frames gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Daniel shivered, glancing around. "This place, it's like a mausoleum." "It's wealth," I reminded him, pulling him close. "And it will be ours." But then his expression hardened. "Where is he?" I swallowed, my voice low. "Upstairs. In the bedroom." We climbed the staircase together. Each step groaned under our weight, as though the house itself objected. When I pushed open the bedroom door, the air struck us, the heavy, suffocating stench of death already beginning to rise. Daniel covered his mouth. "God, Elena." Richard lay still upon the bed, his hands folded across his chest, skin pale as wax. The storm outside rattled the window panes, and for a brief second, I thought I saw his lips move in the flickering lamplight. I gripped Daniel's arm to steady myself. "We can't leave him here," I whispered. "The will is clear. His body must remain in this house until 60 days have passed." Daniel looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Then where?" I turned my gaze to the floor. "The basement." The basement door stood at the far end of the house, past the dining hall with its long mahogany table and 12 high-backed chairs, past the library with shelves of dust-choked books, down a narrow corridor where the wallpaper peeled like old skin. The door itself was blackened oak, its iron hinges rusted. A key, cold and heavy, lay on a hook nearby. I had never gone down there alone. Richard had kept wine and old family belongings in its dark depths, and he forbade me to enter. That night, we carried him. Daniel and I wrapped Richard's body in a bedsheet, the fabric already soaking through with a sickly dampness. His limbs were heavier than I expected, stiff yet unyielding. Daniel cursed under his breath as we heaved him down the staircase, his head lolling with each jolt. The house seemed to groan with every step, floorboards complaining, walls sighing. Once, the grandfather clock struck, though no hour had passed. Daniel froze, the sheet slipping from his grip, but I urged him on. At last, we reached the basement door. The key turned reluctantly in the lock, scraping metal against metal, and the hinges shrieked as we pushed it open. A draft of air rose up, colder than the storm outside, smelling of stone, mildew, and something ancient. We descended, candlelight throwing monstrous shadows against the walls. The basement stretched wide, its floor paved in uneven stone. Wooden shelves lined the walls, stacked with wine bottles coated in gray dust. Old furniture was piled in corners, broken chairs, a cracked mirror, a chest bound in leather straps. The air dripped with moisture, every sound echoing. We laid Richard in the farthest corner, beneath an arch of stone where the shadows clung deepest. His sheet-wrapped form looked more like a bundle of rags than a man, but even there, even in death, he seemed to command the room. Daniel dropped his end with a grunt, wiping his forehead. "There. 60 days. Then we're free." I stared at the body. Something about the silence unnerved me, as though the house itself leaned closer to listen. "Lock the door," I whispered. "We must never go down again." Daniel obeyed. The heavy door shut with a slam, and when the key turned, the sound echoed like a nail sealing a coffin. We stood in the corridor, the storm howling outside, the mansion trembling around us. Daniel slid an arm around me, pressing his lips to my temple. "Now," he said softly, "we can finally be together." And for the first time in years, I let myself believe it. The first nights almost felt like freedom. The storm passed, leaving the jungle wrapped in a heavy fog that rolled through the trees like smoke. By day, the sun barely pierced the mist, and by night, the moon was only a pale blur behind clouds. The mansion became our island, surrounded by silence and dripping leaves. Inside, the air smelled of wet wood and burning candles. We kept a fire in the sitting room, its crackle and warmth pushing back the chill that clung to the walls. Daniel and I would sit on the velvet sofa, its cushions sunken with age, and drink from Richard's wine collection. Dusty bottles lined the shelves, their corks crumbling as we pulled them free. We would laugh, quietly at first, nervously, then louder as the wine burned away our guilt. Daniel teased me about my husband's old portraits, their grim faces glaring down at us from the dining hall. I told him to ignore them. For the first time, I allowed myself to lean into him without fear. We kissed like desperate thieves, clinging to each other as though we could erase the corpse below with the heat of our bodies. His hands traced my skin, his breath mingled with mine, and for brief hours, I was alive again. But the house never let us forget. On the third night, I woke to silence too deep. The rain had stopped, the jungle stilled. Even the insects seemed to vanish. A faint tap, tap, tap echoed beneath the floorboards, steady as the heartbeat my husband no longer had. I sat upright in bed, my nightdress clinging with sweat. Daniel stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He groaned, pulling a pillow over his head. "It's the pipes, Elena. Old houses make noises." But it wasn't the pipes. The sound came again, slow, deliberate, like knuckles rapping against stone. From the basement. I dared not move, dared not breathe, until at last, it faded into silence. On the fifth night, the air grew foul. A sourness seeped up from beneath the floor, faint at first, then stronger by the hour. Daniel cursed as he lit more candles, their wax dripping onto brass holders lined with green patina. "It's the body," he muttered, pacing the dining hall. His reflection in the tall windows looked pale, strained. "We should have buried him." "We cannot," I reminded him sharply. "The will is clear, his body must remain in this house. If we move him, if we defy it, we lose everything." He stopped, staring at me with dark eyes. "You speak of the will as if it were scripture." 60 days, I said firmly. "Only 60 days. Then we are free." But freedom felt farther away each night. On the seventh night, as fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, Daniel and I lay together on the sofa before the fire. The flames danced across the walls, shadows stretching tall like black figures. For a while, we forgot the basement. His lips pressed against mine, his hands tangled in my hair, and the fire's heat wrapped around us like a cloak. My heart raced, not from guilt, not from fear, but from something I had long thought dead. But then came the sound. A dragging noise. From below. It echoed through the floor, soft at first, then louder, like something heavy being pulled across stone. Daniel froze, his body stiff against mine. Our eyes met in the firelight, wide with terror. The noise stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The fire hissed, a log collapsing into embers. The room smelled faintly of smoke and rot. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us dared to. By the second week, the mansion no longer felt like ours. The smell came first. A sickly sweet odor seeped from beneath the floorboards, clinging to every curtain and rug. No amount of firewood or candles could mask it. The velvet sofa in the sitting room, once a place of stolen kisses, now reeked of decay. Even the Persian rug in the hall seemed to breathe it back at us, every thread soaked in the stench. Daniel grew restless. He opened windows despite the fog, letting in cold air that made the drapes shiver. "We can't keep breathing this," he muttered, pacing like a caged animal. His hair grew unkempt, his eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. I tried to soothe him. I brewed tea in Richard's old porcelain set, the cups painted with faded roses. The steam rose warm against my lips, but when I sipped, the water tasted foul, like soil and iron. Daniel spat his out, smashing his cup against the fireplace stones. "It's in everything now," he snarled. "Even the water. This house is poisoning us." I said nothing. I only stared at the fire, watching the flames dance higher each time the wind howled down the chimney. At night, the sounds grew bolder. Scratching, slow and deliberate, like nails raking across stone. Sometimes the basement door rattled in its frame. Once, while Daniel slept, I heard footsteps on the stairs, measured, dragging. My blood froze, but when I lit a candle, the steps ceased. I began to dream of Richard. He stood in the basement, not wrapped in sheets but dressed in his finest black suit, his pocket watch glinting. His lips moved, whispering words I could not hear. When I woke, my throat ached as though I had been speaking back to him all night. Daniel and I began to quarrel. He accused me of keeping secrets, of knowing more about Richard's will than I admitted. He shouted that the old man had cursed us both, that 60 days was a trick. "You wanted him dead," he hissed one night, his face pale in the candlelight. "You let him die. And now you've dragged me into this hell with you." "You wanted the money as much as I did," I shot back. My voice cracked, but anger steadied it. "Do not pretend you came here for love alone." We slept apart that night, he on the sofa, me in the master bed. The rain returned, pattering against the windows, masking the low moan that drifted up from the basement. By the third week, the house itself seemed to rot with us. The grand dining table warped with damp, its polished surface sticky to the touch. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, curling like dead skin. Even the portraits of Richard's ancestors changed. I could have sworn their eyes followed me as I crossed the halls. Daniel stopped shaving, stopped smiling. He began drinking heavily from the wine cellar, bottles littering the floor. One evening, he staggered into the bedroom, reeking of drink, and collapsed onto the bed beside me. "Do you hear him?" he whispered. His voice cracked with fear. "At night? He calls my name, Elena. He wants me. Not you, me." I turned away from him, clutching the blanket. But in the silence that followed, I too heard it, a whisper, faint as breath through a keyhole. My name, carried from the floor beneath us. "Elena." My blood ran cold. It was on the 31st night that Daniel snapped. The storm had returned with fury, rattling the shutters and sending rain hammering against the glass. I lay in the master bed, staring at the ceiling, while Daniel paced the hallway outside, muttering to himself. The floorboards groaned beneath his restless steps. Then came the sound. A low, dragging scrape beneath us. Not faint this time, not imagined. It moved from one side of the basement to the other, heavy and deliberate, as though something vast pulled itself across the stone floor. Daniel froze. His eyes met mine in the doorway, wild and shining in the candlelight. "That's not an animal," he whispered. I couldn't answer. My throat was dry, my chest tight. He snatched a candle from the hall table, the wax spilling hot onto his hand, and stormed down the corridor toward the basement door. "Daniel, no!" I cried, clutching the bedpost, my legs too weak to follow. But he did not stop. The basement door loomed at the end of the passage, its iron hinges black with rust. The stench leaking from beneath it was unbearable now, thick, wet, cloying. Daniel gagged, pressing the back of his hand to his mouth. His trembling fingers found the heavy key on its hook. The metal was slick with moisture, though whether from the damp air or from sweat, I could not tell. "Elena," he said, not looking back at me. "We have to know." He turned the lock. The sound it made was deep, metallic, final. The door creaked open, exhaling a gust of cold air that snuffed the candle flame. For a heartbeat, the corridor plunged into darkness. Then, with a hiss, Daniel relit it, his face pale and strained. Together, we descended. The basement was worse than I remembered. The stone walls glistened with damp, rivulets of water trickling down into black puddles. Shadows jumped madly in the flickering candlelight. The shelves sagged with their weight of dusty bottles and broken relics. And there, in the far corner, lay Richard. At least, I thought it was him. The sheet was gone, shredded and stained. His body sat upright against the wall, back straight as though propped by invisible hands. His head lolled slightly to one side, his eyes half open, milky and gray. His lips were parted, and I swear I saw them twitch. Daniel staggered back, almost dropping the candle. Jesus Christ! I couldn't move. My skin prickled, my breath shallow. The smell was thick, overwhelming, but beneath the rot there was something else, a faint trace of Richard's cologne. Daniel pointed a shaking finger. He wasn't like that when we left him. My legs buckled, and I gripped the damp wall. We shouldn't have come down here. The air shifted. A sound echoed through the chamber, low and wet. A sigh. Daniel cursed, stumbling toward the stairs. I followed, my candle guttering in the draft. Behind us, the scrape of stone filled the air again, louder now, closer. By the time Daniel slammed the basement door shut, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. He fumbled with the key, hands slick with sweat, until at last the lock clicked. We stood in the corridor, chests heaving, faces pale. Daniel turned to me, his voice hoarse. "He's not rotting, Elena. He's changing." That night, I dreamed of Richard again. But this time, he was not whispering. He was smiling. And in his hand, he held Daniel's throat. By the 40th day, Daniel was no longer the man who had arrived through the storm. His face had grown gaunt, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He drank constantly, pulling bottle after bottle from the dusty shelves in the dining hall, gulping until his hands stopped shaking. His once quick smile was gone, replaced with a twitching sneer that surfaced whenever he looked at me. The house had hollowed him out. The noises never ceased. At night, the dragging moved beneath our feet like restless tides. Sometimes it rose up the stairs, soft, shuffling steps that stopped just short of the locked basement door. Other times, it was worse, a voice. Low. Broken. Familiar. Elena. Or, worse still, Daniel. The whispers slithered through the walls, carried on the damp air, curling into our ears no matter how we tried to block them out. Daniel began sleeping in the library with a poker from the fireplace clutched in his hand. I would find him muttering in the candlelight, staring at the rug as though words were written in the weave. "We have to leave," he said one morning, his voice cracked. "I don't care about the will. I don't care about the money. We have to get out." "You know we can't," I whispered, though my resolve was weakening too. "If we run now, all of this, all of what we've done, will be for nothing." He slammed his fist against the window. The fog outside pressed against the glass like milk, thick and impenetrable. "This place doesn't let us leave, Elena. Don't you see? We're trapped." I turned away before he saw the truth flicker in my eyes. On the 42nd day, Daniel tried. He packed what little he had brought, a coat, a knife, a flask, and stormed into the jungle path. I watched from the balcony as his lantern swung in the mist, its glow bobbing between the trees until it was swallowed whole. I stood there for hours, shivering in the cold, until the light returned. But it didn't come from the trees. It emerged from the fog behind the mansion, right back where he had started. Daniel stumbled out, clothes torn, mud streaked across his face, eyes wide with terror. I walked for miles, he gasped, collapsing against the steps. But every path, every turn, it all led back here. I helped him inside, though his body was trembling too hard to stand. That night, he clutched me in the dark, whispering over and over, "We'll never get out. We'll never get out." On the 50th night, the basement door rattled violently, harder than ever before. The hinges groaned, the lock strained. Daniel grabbed the poker and pressed himself against the wood, his knuckles white as he held it shut. "Don't let him out," he begged, sweat pouring down his face. "Don't let him out." The rattling ceased. Silence fell. Then came a knock. 3 sharp raps, steady and deliberate. Daniel screamed, shoving himself away from the door. He ran into the dining hall, overturning chairs, his voice cracking into madness. "We're his prisoners, Elena. Don't you see? He'll never let us have this house. Never." I reached for him, but he recoiled as though my touch burned. His eyes were wild, his face twisted with hatred. "You did this," he hissed. "You let him die. You brought me here. You fed me to him." Before I could answer, the house fell still. Then came the sound of the lock turning. I spun toward the corridor. The basement door had opened by itself. The candle flames guttered, plunging the hall into shadows. A draft of air, colder than any winter wind, swept through the house, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of the grave. Daniel backed away, the poker shaking in his hands. His lips moved soundlessly, a prayer or a curse. Then something caught him. It was invisible, but its grip was real. Daniel was wrenched from his feet, dragged screaming across the floor toward the black doorway. His heels carved lines in the dust as he clawed at the wood, leaving bloody streaks. "Elena! Help me!" he shrieked. His eyes locked on mine, wide with terror, but my body would not move. My legs were stone, my throat sealed shut. With one final cry, he was pulled into the darkness. The door slammed shut. Silence. Only the echoes of his scream remained, fading into the walls. I sank to the floor, trembling, my candle guttering out beside me. Alone now. Utterly alone. Only 10 days remained. The house was silent after Daniel was taken. The dragging, the whispers, the knocks, all of it ceased. The mansion lay heavy in the fog, a tomb waiting to be sealed. I wandered the halls like a ghost, the silence pressing against my ears until I thought I would go mad. The jungle outside never lifted its veil. Fog clung to the trees, the rain never fully stopped, and the wind carried faint echoes that might have been birds, or something else. I marked the days with a knife on the oak table, each scratch a wound in the wood. My food rotted, the fires died, the lamps ran dry. I lived on stale bread and melted snow gathered in chipped porcelain bowls. And always, I avoided the basement door. But sometimes, when I passed it, I swore I felt breath through the keyhole. On the 60th morning, the storm broke. The fog thinned, the first sunlight in weeks spilling through the shutters. For the first time in what felt like eternity, I heard wheels on the muddy path. The lawyer had come. His carriage creaked to a halt, the horses steaming in the cold air. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out, his face pale but composed. He tipped his hat as I opened the front door. Mrs. Gray, he said politely, though his eyes flicked nervously at the crumbling mansion. The 60 days are complete. I trust you fulfilled the terms of Richard's will. Yes, I whispered, my voice cracked from disuse. I stayed. He gave me a measured nod. Then I must see the body. For the record. To confirm all is in order. The words struck like ice. I wanted to protest, to scream that it wasn't safe, that we should leave it locked forever. But my lips would not obey. Richards will demanded proof. If I refused, it would all be for nothing. My hands trembled as I fetched the iron key. The lawyer followed me down the corridor, his shoes clicking sharply against the warped wood. We stopped at the basement door. The smell had dulled, but a strange warmth pulsed through the crack, as though something inside was alive. I unlocked it. The hinges groaned as the door swung open. The lawyer lifted his lantern. After you, madam. I wanted to run. But instead, my feet carried me down the steps, each one colder than the last. The basement was darker than I remembered. The lantern's glow barely touched the walls. And then I saw them. Not one body, but two. Richard sat upright against the stone, exactly as before, but now Daniel knelt beside him, his head slumped forward, his skin as pale as marble. Their hands were clasped together, fingers entwined like lovers. The lawyer froze. Good Lord! Richard's head lifted. His gray eyes opened, gleaming with a wet, unnatural light. His lips stretched into that awful, knowing smile, the same smile from my dreams. Elena, he whispered, his voice echoing through the chamber. Daniel's head snapped up beside him. His eyes were empty sockets, but his jaw cracked open, and from it came Richard's laugh. The lantern shattered on the floor. Darkness swallowed us whole. When light returned, I was outside. The mansion stood quiet, its windows black, its roof hunched against the fog. The lawyer's carriage was gone. My hands were empty. And the basement key was missing. I do not know what became of Daniel. I do not know what the lawyer saw in those final moments. I only know this: Richard had kept his promise. The 60 days were complete. The house was mine. But at night, when the rain returns, I still hear footsteps rising from beneath the floor. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I feel someone standing beside my bed. Breathing. Waiting. Greed and betrayal always demand a price. Elena's desire for wealth and passion led her to abandon loyalty, compassion, and morality. But the curse of Richard's will was never about inheritance, it was about punishment. In trying to gain everything, she lost everyone she loved and chained herself forever to a haunted house, living with the consequences of her choices. When love is replaced with lust, and loyalty with greed, the dead do not rest.